Hey everybody, we are Martin, Robert, and Francis, and this is Snakes and Otters, a pointless discussion of eternal questions. Get ready, we're about to live in your head, rent-free. Hey everybody, welcome to Snakes and Otters, time for episode 22. I'm Martin.
I'm Francis.
And I'm Robert.
So fellas, this is one of those episodes where I feel like I've come up with something and I'm putting you on the spot. Making you research something fun.
Hey, we're supposed to do research? Oh man, I'm going about this all wrong.
What? Are you telling me you didn't do the reading, sir?
There's reading?
And you see our problems, listeners.
So,
No, like being exposed for the fraud you are.
that's harsh, man.
Nah. All in fun, of course.
So, in looking at some of the stuff for our last episode about John Milius, it struck me that film noir, classic Hollywood genre, is pretty interesting stuff that ought to be in our wheelhouse. Because they aren't adventure stories, but they are a glimpse into the same kind of thing as Milius was interested in. That is, as Conrad would undoubtedly phrase it, a glimpse into the dark heart of human person.
Apocalypse Now certainly has a lot of those overtones that goes with that. It's something that's very, very dark, but not gritty like you hear normally here today. It's not. It's
Gritty is a synonym. It's the same thing as a lot of violence, a lot of good guy gone bad kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But yet, this film noir is not that.
It's not that. I think today, the guide in movies like that, it's more nihilism.
Yeah.
Something like, I guess, I've never watched them, but the Purge
Yeah.
film series
Right.
is a nihilism. And that's not film noir.
No, it's because people get what they deserve in film noir.
Generally, yes.
That's correct.
That's part of the formula is, even though it is, what do we call it? There are three hallmarks: fatalism, pessimism, and menace. But one of the other hallmarks or other parts of the genre is, in the end, some kind of justice is restored.
Okay. Which is totally the opposite of nihilism, where there is no such thing.
Right. None of it matters.
Right.
Everyone's destroyed. So what?
Right. Whereas
The whole universe is the Death Star.
Right. Whereas in this case, in film noir's situation, there's always a moral.
Yes.
A cautionary tale, sometimes.
Yes.
Very often.
They're a cautionary tale. So anyway, that's good. That's good stuff. But I think talking a little bit about film noir with some background and some examples are going to be important. And these are probably movies, they're big to me. I don't know how big they are to you guys, but you've probably seen them.
Yeah.
You've probably liked them when you watched them. But film noir is an outgrowth of very stylish Hollywood dramas and German expressionism from the interwar period.
From the 20s and 30s.
From the 20s and 30s. So you have to think about Germany is searching for itself. All of Europe is searching for itself after World War I. You see this in other art. You've mentioned Kipling before.
Right.
How his poetry changed after the war. When you think about all the poetry and all the art of the early 20th century, it's all a reaction to the devastation of World War I.
Sure. I thought we weren't talking about World War I anymore.
Yeah.
No, just kidding. Just kidding.
My favorite poet's T.S. Eliot. Well, he's a post-war writer, and The Wasteland is, that's an expression of that time period. This is too. Film noir begins to be that too, even though it then moves into the 30s and 40s and beyond. So some examples that I bet you guys have seen that you like, stuff like The Big Sleep, And my favorite, Double Indemnity,
Oh yeah, good one. Good one.
which Fred MacMurray cast against type.
Very much so. He was the absent-minded professor.
Yes,
This
he's a
is-
Disney guy, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, this is before My Three Sons, but it was
Yeah. But between this film and then The Caine Mutiny, he's cast as two very important jerks. And even more in Double Indemnity, he's cast as a chump, basically. Double Indemnity is the story of where he meets a woman who wants to kill her husband. He's an insurance salesman. They want to take out a giant life insurance policy against her husband. And the double indemnity comes from the payout's double if it's an accident.
Right.
So they want to stage it to look like an accident. He's against it, doesn't think they can get away with it, but she sweet talks him into it.
Yeah.
Femme fatale.
I think that's a euphemism.
yes.
Yes. Well,
That's
Barbara
that's a-
Stanwyck's very first scene, she's wearing a towel and a smile.
And probably doesn't wear one of them for very long after that.
Well, it is the 40s.
Well,
so-
yes.
Yes, but that's it stakes out her ground very quickly. And she appears to the insurance salesman who just knocked on her door in a towel. So
It sounds like a reverse porno.
Yeah. It's bad people have bad things happen to them, and bad
things that bad people do.
have consequences. In many respects, I think you're right. The whole post-war attitude is very much the genesis of this, because we've seen bad things happen we can't make sense of. We want some justice. We need some justice, and that's kind of where this goes.
Is that really true so much in the 20s in the U.S., though? It was a very prosperous time.
But you have to remember, though, film noir came to its own in the 40s and 50s.
Yes, it's more a reaction.
It's more reaction to World War
It's
II.
what grows out of
It
the
has
whole
to
era.
gestate. It has to simmer for a while.
Yes.
I think some of the postmodernist works that come out along through here were laying groundwork. James Joyce's Ulysses comes to mind.
Yeah.
It's very much about the absolute ridiculousness of life and how things just aren't worth much at all. And when things aren't worth much at all, it's easy to write off characters and show them in more immoral ways, as long as you've got a good justice comeuppance in the end. Comics Code would have been the same way. You couldn't have shown this. You couldn't show certain
True.
things, but eventually they got rid of it because they said, if we show it being shown as bad, then we'll show it. Same type of thing here.
And that factors in too, because obviously there's film censorship
Very much
at
so.
this time, and films have to be submitted to the film censors, the studio people. And they say, nope, cut that part out. Nope, cut that part out.
So
Right,
Barbara
we're not
Stanwyck,
talking government censors. The film studios were censoring themselves.
Yes.
right, because they knew that there would be pushback somewhere along the way, and they didn't want government censorship. They feared that was a possibility.
Right.
The whole concept of, say that again, Barbara Stanwyck with nothing but a towel and a smile.
Yes, that's double.
That's
indemnity.
unheard of to be able to do it, and yet they did.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and the German tie and the post-war tie again is the visual style, black and white, realism, limits on the escapism of the genre.
Okay.
So-
So what's the difference? So why is it? But it's not realism like we know realism today, as we've said. What is it that's unique about it?
The justice comes in the end.
Okay.
In the end, like again, in as an example, double
Indemnity,
indemnity.
yeah.
Fred MacMurray shoots Barbara Stanwyck, and Barbara Stanwyck shoots him. He stumbles back.
Spoilers.
He stumbles back to his office. Well,
You'd have
it is
made
a
the
70-year-old film.
That's right. If you haven't seen it now, shame on you. Go see it. Even if you know what happens, it's
No,
worth.
I have. It's just,
Yeah.
that's
I
what you
know.
say.
Well, it's a great film. He stumbles back to his office and dictates a confession to his boss. His boss suspected this was a scam all along. He just didn't know who was involved, and it turned out to be basically his protege in the office was the culprit the whole time.
Yeah, I think especially from the samples that we've cited, because certainly I've not seen all of the, and I'm not real well versed in it, but several of the movies I know, there's always clear sense of who's the good guy, who's the bad guy. And really, mostly it's just who's the bad guy.
Yeah.
Because you could probably say that the good guy is the poor schlup who's been victimized in some respects.
Yeah.
So, that certainly is going to play well with some of the other moral imperatives of the time, especially as you get into the latter half of the time period when you're talking more of the 40s and 50s. Because, you come out of World War I, there's definitely a sense of we're the good guys, they're the bad guys. And seeing that reinforced, not that we needed a whole lot of examples of, the good guys got theirs, but, that's a message that probably just spoke to them exceedingly well at the time.
I think another thing about it, too, is the fact that there is no innocence to be found in film noir movies. If it's there, it's ridiculed and shown as something that doesn't get you very far. I think that's reflective of the world that these were made in, realizing we lost our innocence in these two world wars here. Mm-hmm. The world is not a nice place. It's never been a nice place. And this stuff has always been going on. We just didn't see it.
There's always menace around the corner.
That's exactly right.
From nearly everyone.
And that's why the style, while it's certainly not a big style, it does pop up now and again. And certainly these themes are going to continually pop up in movies and literature. But partially that's because it's a lesson that I think any society forgets. Mm-hmm. The more prosperous you get, the more likely you are to forget that, as one philosopher said, that it is brutish, nasty, and short, meaning life.
Yes.
Well, I think one of my favorite quotes on that is, when we talked about this earlier, is from the movie Excalibur, which is not a film noir by any means, but it's got one of the great lines delivered by Nicole Williamson in the line in the character of Merlin. He says, "It is the doom of men that they forget," and that's kind of what we're talking about here. We have to be reminded of certain things periodically, and this is just another way of doing that.
And to go back to some of the other episodes we're talking about cultural things. This obviously would be speaking to a need in the culture, and that's what the arts do. Mm-hmm. That's why
they should. They're supposed. Yeah.
Sometimes they lead, which usually when they do, I don't think they're as good. But
right.
Overall, I think they tend to reflect more than push.
They're best when they reflect most of the time. 90-10 maybe.
But it's interesting when you mentioned there are no good characters.
No innocent characters. There can be heroes by any means, but innocence cannot be afforded. In film noir.
In some way,
it's a liability.
Another good example is The Big Sleep we talked about. Mm-hmm. Humphrey Bogart as a hard-boiled detective. He's certainly not innocent,
right?
But he ends up being the good guy.
Sure, absolutely.
And that's an interesting.
But he was worldly, and that's what gave him his heroics. That's what saved him, because the innocent get stepped on. They're the victims that get that these nasty people always take advantage of. That's one of the moral lessons here.
Yeah. And it's an archetype that would carry through into later films. Clint Eastwood made his whole career on that. The anti-hero.
Right.
The worldly, and I've seen a lot, don't push me. All right, you're going to push me? Okay. Now we're going to throw down.
Hell's Coming to Breakfast. Yeah, from Josie Wales. Yes.
So, The Big Sleep is a great one because, again, you're absolutely right. There's no innocent character anywhere. Even the characters that are on the side of good have their own shadows and have their own issues.
It's an evolution of storytelling in many ways, because it really does add complexity and depth to characters.
Hi. It's complex.
That's right. Hey, Trevor Slattery, it's complicated.
It's complicated.
It really gives that depth to characters that, if you think about it, it was very formulaic before then.
Yeah.
And it often is. Yeah. It often is, especially in the studio system.
Well, that's the thing. The more and more I study about this stuff, and I don't mean to harp on it, but all good storytelling is formulaic of some kind.
That's correct.
There's a formula in there.
That's right.
It may be loosely followed, or it may be strictly followed.
Yeah.
But it's there.
Yeah, and I think when it's strictly followed, or where it's obvious, when you see the marionette strings, so to speak.
When it's smack in your face.
That's right. That's ridiculous. And people are insulted by it. And I think this film noir was a reaction to that. Let's do this nuance well, where we can tell that same story that we all want to hear, but we do it in a very different way.
And we can do it in some subtle ways.
That's yeah, exactly. Subtlety and nuance are very much the au revoir of film noir. Did you like that one? That's pretty good.
I like that.
I thought you were- that's right.
That's a good word. You're always that good $10 word guy.
Thank you,
I
sir. I
like
appreciate that.
that. But I want to.
It's the bourbon.
I want to come back around and get your thoughts on one other aspect. Again, we've talked about how it's a view into the dark heart of a corrupted humanity. But in the end, there's justice.
Mm-hmm.
But what defines justice in these films, and why can't we get there without going through all of this?
Take it, sir.
That is the heart of a good story.
Yeah.
Because for justice to have meaning in a story, because we all think we are owed some measure of justice because we are all the heroes of our own stories, right?
Yes.
That's right.
But for a good story, for there to be justice, the hero or the victim, depending on how the film noir is going to play on this a little bit, or at least the guy who's going to deliver the justice, there has to be a lot of peril. There has to be pain. There has to be trials and tribulations, and all of us have dark moments where we feel like we have trials and tribulations. I think one of the things that makes film noir compelling is that all of us can, on some level, sympathize and empathize with the victims. And we love it when the bad guy gets justice, because I think it gives, in its own oddly weird way, it's a subtle way of saying there's hope for you. Bad guys get it in the end.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a commensurateness that has to happen in film noir.
The scales have to be put back right.
Exactly. So whatever bad thing you do, it has to be commensurate to justice that you receive. Eye for an eye is not a bad way of putting it. They're looking for that type of parity in solution here. So the more outrageous the injustice, the more deep and resounding may be the scale balancing.
Yeah, you have to, if you can't start somewhere like on a high level or even on a low level and just keep going down, 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 down. Because on a gut level, we're waiting for it to turn around.
Mm-hmm.
And
so there has to be redemption.
Not necessarily, because that implies that the person who is perpetrating the evil repents.
And that doesn't usually happen in a film noir. You're right.
Film noir is very Old Testament.
Oh, yes.
That's very good. Yes,
okay.
That's very good.
Okay.
So Old Testament while there is a lot about mercy in it, there's also a lot more justice in the Old Testament.
Harsh justice at times.
And harsh, yeah. Not that Jesus wasn't against knocking over the money changers' tables and making a whip of cords and driving them out, but you don't see that as a focus. You see that harshness in dealing with those who are evildoers in a much more explicit way, and I think the film noir is very reflective of that.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
It gives us a visceral thrill when evildoers get their comeuppance.
Oh yeah, I mean,
and it doesn't have to be film noir.
It just did
go back
well.
to Avengers Endgame, because again, this is one of my favorite movies. When Cap picks up that hammer and beats the crap out of Thanos for a few minutes, it's one of the greatest things because we see the hero giving the villain his comeuppance. Now, of course, all of the heroes have to have a part in that particular movie, but it's still the same thing. And of course, Tony Stark makes the ultimate sacrifice.
Right.
And if Thanos isn't killed in the end of that movie, what's the point? And that's why there has to be justice in these, because if you don't, what's the point?
Yeah,
people can live their own miserable lives. They don't need to go to a movie and watch it. Have somebody else. It's like, I already know this stuff. When's the good stuff going to happen? When's this guy going to get his comeuppance?
That's right.
I think that's important.
That. We love the idea of Elijah coming into town with a great big stick and bringing a butt whooping with him. Now that's straight out of the Book of Kings, but that's exactly what he does, and he puts up with no crap. In fact, I will submit to you that the only time that movies fail in this is when they don't give us some version of this. And I can get, and even though it was a popular movie, I'll give you the end of Silence of the Lambs when Anthony Hopkins' character, Hannibal Lecter, gets away. That was unheard of. You just didn't do that. The bad guy wins and comes back again. Well, it's because it's a reversal. It's taking it to go at it from the other way around. Another great movie, and this is a reaching way back here. Do you remember the movie There Was a Crooked Man? It's a Western from the late 60s. Kirk Douglas and Henry Fonda. Kirk Douglas,
Yeah.
And he goes to prison, and he ends up manipulating everybody to get out to find his ill-gotten gains. And Henry Fonda, who's the warden, is the only one that is on to him. He follows him, and in the end, Kirk Douglas betrays everyone to get out. But he hid his money in a rattlesnake pit. He opens it up, and the rattlesnake bites him in the neck and kills him. Henry Fonda comes in, and you find out he's been the guy that's manipulating him all along himself. He's the real bad guy, and he shaves his beard, takes the money, and rides off into the sunset. That's a subversion of this type of an approach here. Justice is sort of done, but it's never complete. And I think that's one of the things film noir has. There's always something else out there. It's always more complicated than we're making it out to be.
So you guys have been knocking on the door where I was going. So it's really good. Really, really good. But justice being Old Testament and redemption and mercy being New Testament,
yeah,
are heading in the right direction, because there's an Old Testament concept at the bottom of this. And that's the question of, why do we have to go through all of this to get justice? Original sin.
Well, that would be exactly it.
So
we are a fallen people.
We are a fallen people, which is always one of my things of...
Oh, yeah. There's the universal question.
Yes. Yeah, why do these things happen? Well, they happen because we're a fallen people.
That's right.
We are imperfectible as a species.
Yeah.
It's not possible.
It's the doom of men that they forget. You think we'd learn by now, but we don't.
We don't.
No.
Every generation thinks it knows better. It won't happen to us, and we make the same mistakes over and over and over again.
Menace can be hardwired into our DNA, and we have to have justice eventually to remind us of our better angels.
Yeah. Well, it's the duality of our natures, because we're not all menace, and we're not all good either.
Right. So I think one of the things we talked about earlier was how stories, and this might have been during the show prep, the essentials of what makes a good story are ingrained in almost all societies. Doesn't matter how sophisticated they are or not. There's always a storytelling tradition, even if it's oral, and we all recognize when a story is good and bad. We may not be able to put our finger on what makes it bad or what makes it good, but we know when it's one or the other.
Instinctively, yeah. It goes beyond cultural boundaries.
And that's probably partially related to this. We all have the ability to be either good or bad. Some would say we are going to tend more towards the bad than we are the good. Mm-hmm. So others will say, no, we're going to tend more towards the good than the bad.
It's an old argument.
But the very fact that we can differentiate between the two means we know there's conflict. Everybody knows there's conflict between good and bad. Yeah. 2-year-olds know when they've done something wrong, because 2-year-olds can lie their little butts off. And they do it because they know they shouldn't have done whatever it was they've done. Yet they don't have the ability to truly reason yet. Right. So that can be an argument for, yes, we are always going to screw up on the bad side. But the fact that we know these things, and they show up in the stories we tell, because that's part and parcel of being human, is striving against both sides. Because when we're feeling like, I really want to be a little selfish, that's striving against our better nature.
Right.
When we're saying, I can't let that happen, I've got to throw myself on that hand grenade, that's striving against our worst selves.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
So I think film noir is, it's a great example of doing that, seeking that justice. You know,
it encapsulates it well, which is what movies do. They take all this and distill it down into 2 hours. Which is almost an absurdly ironic proposition to begin with. Can you really do that? But when you do it well, it resonates. Absolutely.
Right. Yeah. You may use these tired old tropes in new and different ways, but we recognize the symbolism. That we recognize the elements because we are so familiar with them from our daily lives, and so it gives us that visceral thrill I mentioned, but it also gives us that satisfaction. Because let's face it, if the guy comes in and Barbara Stanwyck convinces him to knock off her husband, and they're successful and they get the money, we're like, well, that's it?
I don't want to see somebody get away with something.
Right, especially if they're going to get a lot of money, because I don't have that money.
Right.
So, yeah, we want to see that. And I think that's part of that tendency to good, is we know that when evil is done, there has to be something to compensate.
And there's
for that.
a catharsis to the confession as well.
Yes.
It is, which is very common in film noir. This is very different than the nihilism we talked about in modern cinema and stories today. I think that's the bankruptcy of that approach that we're seeing, because you hear of many of these type stories where they just don't have that.
It's a reflection of the age.
That's exactly it.
Film noir comes from an age when there was a good and a bad, good and evil. There's specific right and specific wrong. We come from an age today where things are very relative.
Right.
There's a distinct moral relativism where your truth is just as good as my truth, is just as good as Martin's truth.
And I have the ability to do it myself, despite you.
Right.
Whether you wish
now,
me
of
to or
course,
not.
hand in hand with that is, well, my truth is better than your truth, and therefore you are evil. So it's
right.
a weird mix. It's moral relativism as long as you agree with me.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. And there's violence for violence sake.
Yeah.
There's violence in film noir, but it's a violence that tells a story.
It
and
establishes
isn't just
the
mass
evil,
violence. Yeah, it establishes.
but also can be the justice. I mean, the justice doesn't have to be violence, but probably often is.
Usually the best stories are the very evil that is perpetrated directly leads to the eventual justice that comes about.
Yeah.
I think that's probably true in almost every story.
Well, Shakespeare's probably the best one that you can figure it out, because it's bloody obvious that there's a fatal flaw in particularly tragedies. There's a fatal flaw carried within the person, the character, that leads to their undoing, despite their attempt to do otherwise.
Yeah.
That's just good storytelling.
So we pop film noir. We've taken Barbara Stanwyck in a towel,
Oh, you're going back to that again.
and then push that all the way through to Judeo-Christian ethics, to moral relativism, to a sense of...
We covered all of human
Testament-
history today.
Yeah. Yeah. Barbara Stanwyck's towel led us to a discussion of all of human history, and that humans are not perfectible creatures.
No, we
Not
didn't
on
say,
this earth.
Well, yeah, we didn't go that far to say that. Now that's not.
He
saying,
did.
Yeah, well, he did. Well, gets into theological questions. Are we the consequences of are we perfectible here? Well, maybe we are, maybe we ain't. But that doesn't mean we stop trying. Because
Right.
You don't stop trying.
that's
but
very
there has to
Calvinist.
be a
Because if you think if I
recognition.
can't do anything about this, why does it matter? I either is or I ain't.
Yeah,
And that's-
there's that, or it goes back to the, it's also a very nihilist point of view,
Which we've circled back
in
to that
some
again.
ways.
Yeah.
We are not perfectible in the sense that God is perfect, and by that I mean this: we are not perfectible because at some point we have done evil. So if we have, then we can never be perfect because we've already got a flaw. And by our very nature, we are somewhat selfish. It is the great story of mankind, though, that we learn to overcome that selfishness. That's what makes a man a saint.
Yeah.
Or a woman.
We may not be perfectible, but we are always improvable.
Yes.
And that is
Yes.
exactly, and that's the battle
There's
that we have to
grace in the striving.
fight.
Oh, absolutely.
Absolutely, there is. Very
Now,
much so.
the Calvinists may not put it that way, but yes, for us, from our tradition, yes, there is grace in the striving because motivation is supremely important. Because you can do the right thing for the wrong reason and go to hell for it.
Well, I'll give you the best line of all from Tennyson: to strive, to seek, to find, and not to yield. That's really what we're talking about here. Is the entire effort is worth the struggle, even if we know we can. It's like calculus. It's all about limits. You can never get all the way to the point you're going to, but you can get infinitely closer along the way. That's what we're doing here with the human experience.
And that's the whole meaning of humanity.
Yeah.
The meaning
To strive, to seek, to find, and not to yield.
I like that a lot.
Yeah.
I like that a lot.
It goes back to, since you brought it up, original sin. We're always seeking to retrieve, to regain what was lost. That's the heart of film noir in many ways, because we've lost something, and there it's presented as getting it back through justice.
Yeah, it's restorative justice in many ways.
Restorative justice, yes, yes.
But every other good story is about the struggle for it. Not all good stories end with a good ending for the hero, but doesn't mean they're not a good story. But that struggle, I think, is always there.
The struggle is ennobling. Yes.
Oh, yes.
And all the trappings that go with film noir, the black and white, the particular filming touches and things like that, they all serve this narrative. They're all basically window dressing to bring about the issue that we're talking about here. What's that heart of darkness?
Yeah.
In many respects, that's
yes.
there.
Part of what's going on in a film noir is because of the choices the characters have made, their future choices are starting to become limited, and things are starting to close off on them. And the symbolism of the window blinds that's common in many of the films, where the shadow throw bars across the characters, that's emblematic of the character now is in a cell of his or her own creation.
The ultimate irony, which we love irony. We absolutely love irony. That makes a great story when it's done well.
So the characters become imprisoned by his or her own choices, and there's that box of humanity again of, all right, how do I get out? Where's my struggle?
Right.
Where's... And
sometimes it's I should have known better. Sometimes they were clueless, and it all works.
Sometimes it's how was I? It's like what could it hurt? Followed closely by how was I supposed to know?
That's right.
Yeah.
That's a lot of the human condition on a day-to-day basis.
You're exactly correct on that one.
Yeah. Yeah, a statement of, are we trapped? Is humanity trapped? And the answer is, well, we're trapped in imperfection, but that's a really broad room.
Yeah.
It's a really big space. Mm-hmm. So there's still ways to get out. There's still ways to move around and be ennobled and to find grace.
The way is clear. We may not be able to see the destination, but we know the correct way. Do we always follow it? Well,
I don't think we even always know it. I mean, I
we
think
should.
There are plenty, we should.
We
yes.
should. Yes, correct.
As far as the being trapped, you talked about decisions that the characters make cut them off from other decisions. To a great extent, that's true in everyday life. You have two job offers. You take one, that cuts you off from that other one.
Opportunity cost, yeah.
The road less
that
traveled.
is very good. But I think in reality, as far as the cutting them off to where you are boxing yourself into a negative end, that's not always true. Now, there may be temporal, secular punishments, ultimate ends that you cannot avoid once you make certain decisions. But as far as the redemption part, from what we believe, Francis and I for sure, and there's always, up until the very last microsecond, a chance for the redemption side.
Yes.
So the choices, and which is one of the things which probably why that doesn't work so well in the movies, is that you can't have a guy do horrible, horrible, bad things for 2 hours in a movie, and then the very last split second before the end comes in, he says, "I'm sorry."
Well, yeah. There's no place for redemption in film noir. Is that a fair statement?
I think you're right. I think there's not... Most of the characters are not redeemed in the examples we
And I think that's one of the reasons that...
But a justice is served, but there's not usually a coming out the other side a better person kind of thing. That's
Right.
a different sort of story.
It is, and that's why you call it depressing.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's one of the reasons why.
Well, it's fatalistic.
It's fatalistic.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
right, yeah. And that's why it was not sustainable outside of the crucible that birthed it.
Well, and yes, because you're at an age in history where black and white is a very stark reality. Whether it's the Allies versus the Axis against the Nazis, whether it's the West versus the Soviet Empire. All of these things are either have happened or starting to happen more and more during this time period. And of course, before the Second World War, you've got the misery of the Depression, which followed the euphoria of the 1920s, of the Roaring '20s. So there's been some very stark ups and downs for a lot of people here.
Yeah.
So those that were the unemployed that were living in the Hoovervilles and what have you, they're the ones that are looking for that justice. And so I think that is probably going to feed into that. A very black and white, pardon the obvious pun, view of how things work is going to be the operating paradigm during this time period. So film noir almost has to happen.
That's very well put.
Yeah. Well, guys, we're at about 35 minutes here, so we're going to wrap up. But I want to leave you with this one thought. One of the things that strikes me about this too is, in film noir, it's very seldom that you're a victim of circumstance.
Oh.
Okay. Yeah.
At least as I understand, in the films that I'm thinking of.
Yeah. It's kind of Shakespearean
Again,
in a way.
right.
Yeah.
Because you can't
you're
punish
always-
circumstance.
Right. You're always, again, you're a prisoner of your own decisions.
Right.
So while it's fatalistic and it's borders on nihilism, but isn't nihilism, free will is at the cornerstone of this.
Oh, yeah.
You could almost say it's an argument against free will. Because look what it gets you.
Well,
Against disordered free will, certainly.
yeah, it's just to take the example though of Double Indemnity. The investigator has free will as well,
Yes.
and he's using his free will to investigate and try to find out that yes, this is a scam and we're not going to pay this claim. So he's trapped as well, but his destiny is different from the other two characters that are trapped by their decisions.
That does border on nihilism a lot. That we're all just pawns. Mongo is pawn in a game of life.
Well, but it isn't, because in the end,
He does the right thing.
the investigator was right all along.
Yeah.
They get what's coming to them.
Yeah, they get what's coming to them.
Yeah,
Barbara
oddly enough.
Stanwyck and Fred MacMurray.
Yeah.
And on top of that, the ending scene, though, is the investigator, the guy that was right all along, lights a cigarette and sits with Fred MacMurray's character while he's dying. So there's mercy as well.
I was going to say, this is one where you could almost say, this is a film noir that does have redemption. Because he confesses.
The confession has to be a big part of it, yes.
Yeah. Well, yeah, there is no redemption without confession.
There's a confession basically in The Big Sleep. Lauren Bacall's character has to basically confess what they've been up to.
Well, again, I'm not saying it's true for The Big Sleep, because just as a general thing, there's confession born of repentance. But then there's also confession born of, okay, you've cornered me, now I have to admit it. That's not truly confession.
Well, yeah. Also, is this just a technique for giving exposition to the story, or to give closure to the end?
It's an important part of the closure, an important part of the justice.
And
The misdeeds have to be admitted to. That's a feature
Is that
of the genre.
Story requirement, or is that a moral requirement? I submit it's a story requirement.
No, I think it's both.
It's
because
yeah.
You have to have somebody admit what they've done wrong for it to be justice. Otherwise, how do you know you're punishing the right person?
Okay, that's fair.
And I think
like that.
I think if we're talking about justice in the way we have with this, you want to make sure you got the right person. You really do. You want to make sure you get both Fred MacMurray and Barbara Stanwyck, not just one of them.
Yeah, yeah. This has been pretty tremendous. Again, I love this kind of thing where I kind of catch you guys a little bit flat-footed and throw something crazy out to you. You've looked it up a little bit, and you came through with, you tied everything from original sin to infinite mercy to Barbara Stanwyck's towel. I love that. I love that a lot. Thanks for being with us here every week at Snakes and Otters, a pointless discussion of eternal questions. Be sure to spread the word on your social media accounts. Follow us and retweet us. We are on Instagram and on Twitter at Snakes and Otters.
Let your friends know that they can find us on Podbean, Spotify, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, Apple Podcasts, and on YouTube. Just search Snakes and Otters Podcast to find us, and please remember to leave us your comments and reviews. It helps people find us.
And you can always send us an email at snakesandotterspodcast@gmail.com.
I'm Martin.
I'm Robert.
And I'm Francis. Catch us next week. Same snake time, same otter channel.